Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Power Tools of Office 365, what to use when, apps, forms, workflows, etc. We'll get into that today. We're just getting going when some people are still joining. My name is Scott Restivo. I'm with Crow Canyon Software, and we are very proud today to host MVP Joel Oleson to give this presentation. Joel is a renowned SharePoint expert. He's been with SharePoint ever since the beginning. He was one of the first SharePoint admins. He was the first SharePoint admin at Microsoft when they were first getting going in their data centers there. And in the 20 or more years since then, he's become Microsoft Regional Director and MVP, well known in the Microsoft and SharePoint world as an expert in SharePoint and Office 365. So we're very glad to have him on board, and he'll be giving a presentation today, the bulk of the presentation on Power Tools, and hopefully this will guide you. There's a lot of interest in this topic of business process automation on Office 365 and SharePoint. It's a lot of interest, a lot of people looking to move off InfoPath or to automate business processes or move off legacy solutions. So hopefully this webinar will provide some useful information for everyone and be of good use for you as you go down that journey. As we get going, first I want to put in some information about the webinar, some basic information, so we have some kind of like housekeeping done here. The webinar screen that you have as an attendee has a questions box. You can put questions in there. We'll try to answer them as we go along. Those maybe a lot of them. There's a lot of people on the webinar. We'll try to get to what we can during it, but we'll also be answering the questions after through email. Maybe we'll write a blog about it. We'll see what we can to get those questions, your questions answered. You can always email us at sales@crowcanyon.com, and we'll get the questions answered either directly or through Joel. One way or the other, we'll help you out with that. We also have a number of handouts available in the attendee screen also, and we'll have a recording of this webinar and the slide deck available. There'll be some links on that later in the webinar, and we'll get going. So basically, the structure of the webinar is that there'll be a presentation by Joel, and that'll be the bulk of it. I will go over at the end for about 5 or 10 minutes about our Nitro Studio, which you'll learn more as we go through this. Crow Canyon is very glad to sponsor this webinar. We've been in this business for 20 years doing collaboration tools applications on top of the SharePoint and Office 365 space. We started out with the Microsoft Outlook and Exchange world. In the last 12 years or more, we've been in the SharePoint and Office 365 spaces, developing a number of business applications. Also, we have this Nitro Studio, which is the application creation platform, and we do custom solutions. The business applications are for people who want ready-to-go applications like help desk, service desk, customer service, facilities, work orders, equipment, asset tracking. There's a whole group of these that we have available for people who want out-of-the-box, ready-to-go applications that run on SharePoint, whether on-premises, SharePoint 2013, 2016, 2019, or in Office 365. Those applications are used by organizations around the world and have very good following. And we also have this Nitro Studio. Nitro Studio is an application creation platform. From our application work, we developed this studio, a set of enhancements on top of SharePoint and Office 365 in order to provide forms, workflows, portals, reporting, and many other capabilities that enhance the base SharePoint and Office 365 in order to allow us to build those applications. We also do a lot of custom solutions for people. So hopefully you'll check out Crow Canyon, www.crowcanyon.com. And I see a lot of people at shows. I go to a lot of these shows, like there's one in Branson coming up next week with the North American Collaboration Summit in Branson, Missouri. There's a SharePoint Saturdays we go to. There's SharePoint Fest. There's one coming up early May in Washington, D.C. There's also the big Vegas show and later in May. I mean, there's a number of these shows all year long, and hopefully we'll be able to connect at one of those and talk a little more about your requirements and needs. But rather than belabor all that, and with that introduction, I'd like to move right into Joel's presentation so we don't, there's a lot of information he has. He's been showing me his slides, and it's a very exciting show. And I think you all will like this very much. And Crow Canyon is very glad to sponsor it. And let Joel take it from here.
Hey, thanks a lot, Scott. It's great to be here. Very excited to talk to everybody about this very hot topic. It's exciting that we've assembled so much of the community here to kind of dig into the various tools that Office 365 has, these power tools. And I've seen more and more interest in them. In fact, I've noticed they're starting to create little events just around the power tools. And I think Microsoft as well has just been investing more and more. And what it means by having these tools means more integration with Azure. It means more integration with other line of business systems. And that being said, I think there's a lot of confusion between what you get when you buy your various subscriptions with Office 365 and what do you get with the P1 or the P2 or what's this premium connector or what are you talking about that I only get so many flows. There's a ton of confusion even between forms and PowerApps, and let alone that there's 3 levels of Power BI, and so on. And you're in a company, you're trying to figure out, well, if I can't get it, how is the rest of my organization going to get it? So this presentation is really designed around being able to wrap your head around these power tools, these tools for building applications in Office 365. And we thought we'd start off with a poll just to help us understand who's on the call today. And we actually have a pretty good crowd today. About 500 people on the call right now. It's exciting. Let's go ahead and start the first poll. And the question is going to be around what are you currently using for developing applications in SharePoint?
Yeah, we'll give people like 15 seconds or so to answer that, and hopefully they'll.
Yeah, and as they're answering, if you can actually kind of speak to, I actually can't see what they're clicking on. Sometimes you'll see kind of a animated visual on your side if you want to just speak to what you're seeing.
Sure. And it's a multiple answer question, multiple choice.
If you want to just tell us what the choices are even.
Well, it's right there on the screen, but it says basic SharePoint list libraries, not doing much of anything, just out of the box SharePoint. And a lot of people are clicking that, which shows there's a lot of opportunity to enhance what they're doing with the tools that Microsoft or third-party providers like us provide to make it more business process automation platform. InfoPath and SharePoint designers, of course, it's getting its attention there. Some people have started using PowerApps and Flow. Not so many are longtime users of PowerApps and Flow, we're seeing. And about a quarter of the people are using other or third-party tools, and you probably know who they are, right? What those tools.
There's a pretty rich ecosystem that Microsoft has, and a lot of those companies have been around for a decade. I know that Crow Canyon's been around for quite a while.
Yeah, 20 years.
Wow.
So I can close this poll. You want to? I think we had enough time, so we can move right into the demo. Yeah, let's do that. It's been up for over a minute, so I'll close it. And
anybody who has any questions about what we just witnessed, I'm going to be blogging about the results of that survey and give you my 2 cents on what I think is currently happening in the SharePoint environment. And I think that, let me just start with reflecting on the fact that I do think a lot of people are still finding that they're still using SharePoint Designer and InfoPath, even though Microsoft has tried to, I know this is a little bit funny, but back in the day, SharePoint Designer and InfoPath were the way of building applications in SharePoint. And when Microsoft said, hey, InfoPath is going away, and you get a decade or whatever, and then that number has continued to push and push and push. Like I remember when I had a friend who was on the InfoPath team, and I remember when that team got laid off or got shuffled around inside of Microsoft. That was a long time ago. Basically the 2010 version of InfoPath was really the last significant version of InfoPath. I know that there was a 2013 version of it, but it was essentially, I think there may have been 1 or 2 features. It was basically repackaged as 2013, but the team basically had not done any significant development on it since 2009, 2010. It's pretty wild. So given that, it really is time to move on. And as I say that, I was one of those ones who organized that InfoPath funeral. I know a lot of people are like, what in the world is going on with this? But a lot of us in the community, we felt like it was important for us to both send a message back to Microsoft that, hey, InfoPath's dead. What do you want us to do? You really need to be able to communicate to us. So at SPC, we had this massive funeral where we walked around the exhibit hall with this InfoPath casket, just in jest. It was in fun. And it was a lot of what we were trying to kind of moan and mourn as we were walking around was, well, what are we going to do? And I feel like Microsoft really has put their best foot forward now we have a very significant amount of tools here, but the question now again is, what are we going to do? InfoPath clearly is dead. Microsoft's trying to move on. The community would love to move on, but InfoPath doesn't necessarily line up directly with any one of these tools. Some of the features are in one tool, some of the features are in yet another tool, and so on. And so basically, my thoughts are here is how do we get the community on the same page around what to use when? And that's really what this presentation's about. But before we do that, we've got one more quick poll, which again, I will be reflecting on my blog after the event. So if you want to go ahead and launch that, Scott.
There it is. It's up there now.
Right.
What version of SharePoint are you using? Office 365, 2019, 2016, 2013, other. Again, multiple choices because some people are on 2013, moving to 2019 or moving to the cloud or whatever. So it's good to have multiple choices. We're at about 75 people voted. Most people are, surprisingly, 80% are on SharePoint Online, Office 365, which makes sense because if you're doing application development, usually Office 365 is a rich set of tools up there, right? Office.
And I think that that's actually not far off from my experience as well. Like I remember when we broke the halfway point, and that really was about 3-4 years ago, where we had the divide between online and on-prem. And with the significant portion of the community here talking about this, I really have seen a lot of the energy move from on-prem to the cloud with massive enterprises that said they would never go. They definitely have gone in huge paths, and basically this is also a reflection of the fast track program where Microsoft has pushed really hard to help get everybody over and really kind of prove that out. So that's pretty significant to say that 20% are still on-prem. As we were talking about what's the best webinar, how do we reach the community, and how do we, we were talking about all these different tools, Forms, Flow, PowerApps, Power BI, and all the premium sets of features across these suite of products, and the pro set of things we're talking about now. When should you use what? And really that's what this whole presentation is about. But we put together this infographic, and Jocelyn on Crow Canyon actually is the designer who put this together. We kind of went back and forth around how do we best represent these power tools, and originally we we're kind of talking about gears and these kind of things, but ultimately I really like where we landed with this idea of each of these products is kind of like a tool, and they have their different ways they can be used. But just like somebody who comes to the garage for the first time, they got to learn the names of these tools. They got to learn what purposes and how they should be used. And so I think that was a really nice visual. And just to kind of high level to start talking about these things. And the way this presentation goes, it's really going to go from left to right here. We're going to dive into Forms. We're going to dive into Flow and PowerApps and Power BI. And essentially what you're going to see in this deck is I'm going to take Forms and I'm going to tell you, like, what is it good for? What should be using Forms for? And the idea that it really is surveys, quizzes, and polls is the high level. That's the 10,000 foot level. And I want people to be able to, you really should be able to just rattle that off. If somebody says, what is Forms? It's really those lightweight, I need to go do a quick poll or a survey. I want to be able to just gather information. You just did something, you want to gather feedback, boom, here's a Microsoft form. And so there's tools like SurveyMonkey and this kind of thing. When you're inside the organization, Forms is great. And in fact, what's great about Forms is you can actually use it with Anonymous. In fact, I think that's one of the secret things people often don't know about Microsoft Forms is it's anonymous. Your users can actually use this without a license. And when you start talking about that, that's one of the major contrast perspectives of how that applies to PowerApps, because PowerApps is something that's you actually have to have a license for it. Your user has to be given a PowerApps license to actually use it. In fact, if you haven't given them that, they won't actually be able to respond to or fill out the form or the whatever application you've built. They actually have to be given a license inside of Office 365, which also means there is no anonymous for PowerApps. And that's a huge contrast between the two platforms. And so what's interesting in PowerApps, you can build these rich web UX type environments, it was actually designed from the beginning as a tool for building applications in mobile. It was built for building things in tablet. Right out of the gates, it was really designed for that purpose. And when you start talking about flow, well, what is flow? It's this engine. It's built for triggers and actions and conditions. It's got this slick web UI where you basically can add little things where it's like the if this then that type of experience. And flow is basically built on top of logic on the back end. And we'll talk more about what these all are. And what you're not going to get in this presentation is, unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to do demos of all these things. This would be a full day workshop if we did that kind of thing. Really what we're trying to get through here is just on the 100 to 200 level, just give me what are these things, how they work together, and when to use what. The Power BI, that's really the stuff that you're putting, it's the icing on the cake when you're trying to get your analysis, your report, your visualizations, the dashboards. In fact, what's great use of Power BI I've found in Office 365 is you even get your usage analytics right out of Office 365. They've got some reports you can, first set of reports you should be using even is go ahead and use Power BI to determine what's adoption look like in Office 365 as an example. And once you start working with those set of widgets, start building your own set of dashboards for, hey, how's SharePoint working? Yeah, I was working at Blizzard up until 2-3 weeks ago, and the thing that I would use to show the CIO how our adoption of SharePoint and OneDrive was going was actually with Power BI. I would, and even though, I won't talk too much about licensing there, but essentially, certain people couldn't see the stuff. So I would end up building the data in Power BI, and I would end up creating snapshots for my weekly reports that would show how adoption was happening month over month and so on. So exciting stuff. There's some really good stuff here, and if you want this infographic, it's free. In fact, it's share alike. Go ahead and download it, use it in your company, use it in your presentations. I really hope this can actually be a resource that people can actually use as they're discussing the different Office 365 power tools inside your company. And so with that, we'll kind of jump in. I do like this visual from Microsoft, and so you actually will see this visual on the Microsoft side, and this will actually kind of dig in a little bit on what the agenda is today. But essentially, Azure and the infrastructure of Office 365 is really where this stuff lives. We've got Dynamics, we've got Office 365, you've got Azure, and what's really incredible here is when you start building these applications, you can use PowerApps, you can use Flow, you can use Power App BI for the analytics, and essentially with either the common data service or the logic apps or the data connectors, you can then basically create these orchestrations and start to build applications. And we'll start to dig in a little bit more on this. But essentially, the agenda is, first off, we're going to cover Forms, then Power Apps, then Flow, then Power BI. And our sponsor, Crow Canyon, is going to cover Nitro Studio at the end. So I hope we have time for all that. And we're going to make time for all that. And if you have any questions, feel free to add them into the Q&A. I'm not going to take questions along the way. So feel free to add those in. And anything I can't get to, I will cover in the blog. That's the plan. So what is Forms about? Forms is now enterprise ready, meaning it has launched. This is no longer a preview tool. It's form surveys and polls. It's anonymous, like I talked about. The data is encrypted at rest, which is fantastic. So when you talk about compliance, you decide where your data is stored. So you as well are responsible from a compliance perspective, but Forms itself is the SOC compliance level C, and it does support GDPR compliance with some configuration. As I mentioned, depends on where you're storing your data, if it's in a list or if it's in Azure. But that's the cool thing here is your front end is off an Office web app or the web front end. It's SQL Azure as the back end by default, but you can store your data in lists. You can use Flow to then push that into various other types of repositories, but that's part of the nature and how these things start to work together. Forms can be used standalone or within applications, even Excel. In fact, people talk about forms in Excel, SharePoint, Teams. You think about Teams for a second. You're talking to a channel. You don't have to create a SharePoint site to then push your flow in there. You could actually create your form and then expose that through Teams. So it's really interesting how these things all start to become parts and pieces here. You could even have Sway host your form, which is kind of clever. If you want to read more about that, there's a bit.ly link there for you. And this deck, people are going to say, hey, how do I get this deck? There was actually some really good stuff in here. Well, I will be posting this to SlideShare right after the presentation. You'll see the link at the very end. I'll also be tweeting a link once I post it to SlideShare. Now, this is clever. I did find that when I started looking for, well, what are the limits? Like when, Microsoft doesn't necessarily like to talk about limits all the time. And what's interesting is a few years ago, I posted a blog post around the limits in SharePoint of when we were talking about the 2000 item limit way back. And it's like, well, file size limits and what are the default file formats and what are the symbols that in a file name that aren't included. So basically that kind of thing. I was like, wouldn't it be really cool if we had something like that for forms? And I couldn't find anything, so I actually ended up creating something. Started with kind of the first 6 things, and then it grew from there. But essentially, this little infographic, which as well you can grab on bit.ly forms limits, as you can see in the link there. But basically, a couple of key things as I noticed in terms of, well, how do you place forms? How big of a form can it handle? Well, the first thing you're going to notice is it is a limit of 100 questions. And that number does go down based on the type of question. So if you're trying to do a ranking type of thing where there's ultimately a 1 to 10 type of ranking question where it's like, hey, how did we do? And you have a 1 through 10 type of radio button type of question, you may only be able to get 10 questions. So that's a really important aspect to this. The other thing that I thought was really interesting is when you start saying, we're going to use this for an RSVP. Well, when you say RSVP, a lot of the purpose for an RSVP is to be able to say, I'm coming, but what if you change your mind? One of the key things to understand is that with forms, you can't update it. So basically, it's a one-time deal. So if you use this, like something like t-shirt sizes might be okay, but maybe they're, because people's, t-shirt size may not change, but maybe they don't need the t-shirt anymore or, whatever. So it really depends on what you're trying to do there. But definitely a key thing here, and one of the major differences between PowerApps is with forms, there is no coming back. There is no coming back to update the response. Same kind of deal there with the limit of questions. On the PowerApp side, you don't have that limit of the number of questions. You can make your things crazy long. On PowerApps, it's basically they've got it's around the 2000 item kind of scenario. But obviously, you wouldn't be creating a form that has 2000 questions. I wouldn't think anyway. Kind of moving our way down there, the choice fields. Choice is a really interesting one. So let's say you're asking to fill in your country, and you got this nice drop down with all the countries in the world. That's not one of the ones out of the box. So you basically have to create a choice drop down field for people to be able to fill in their country. Well, one of the limitations here, and I think this is kind of a key one, if it will only store 60. So that means if you've got people from 100 different countries, you're only going to get 60 out of it. So and there's nothing in there that tells you that, which is kind of sad, I think. I do see that as more of a bug, the fact that you're only going to get 60 options in your results. So basically, you got to be careful on that one. And I think I'd be interested to know, like, I'm sure there's workarounds for that, or finding workarounds for that, but basically the idea that choice fields are only storing 60 options is something to be aware of. And the 4,000 character max, that's another one where, you know, you're giving them a long response and they may go on and on and on, but when you're looking at your data, you're only going to get 4,000 characters. So that's definitely another kind of key one to understand. This is really lightweight. You know, you're not going to be able to add one of those things that counts the number of characters. That would be more of a power app. You basically are limited to the UI that you get. And so as it relates to UI, that's one of the key things to understand about forms is it is what it is. What you see is what you get. And from a perspective of you're creating your simple form, you're asking a bunch of questions. Form validation is definitely one of the feedback pieces. And we'll look at feedback in a minute. If you're building Likert scales, same kind of deal. Going back to that limit on questions, you got to be careful because it's somewhere around 20 questions. So it really depends on how you're laying out your form as to how many questions you're going to be able to get in there. The good news is it actually will remind you. It's going to say, hey, it's going to cut you off basically on the questions part of it. So you're not going to notice until you actually hit that. But it's one thing to be aware of. So I mentioned there's more feedback, and a lot of this I do want to kind of give a shout out to the people who, when I first put that forms limits out there, we got a bunch of feedback, and I think that the feedback we got was really fantastic. Some of these are in user voice, some of them aren't. So I would highly encourage you, if you see these things or if these mean a lot to you, go vote them up in user voice. And if they're not there, go ahead and create one, and we'll all tweet it out and we'll jump in. But basically, the feedback I heard from the community around this was the styling, the branding, and I definitely experienced this myself, where it's like, yeah, you can choose an image for the background, but if you wanted to do something fancy with images, there's no real branding. You can't add some special chrome. It's basically all you get is the background. Even trying to change something as simple as the fonts or the font face or the font size, nope. It's basically you get what they give you. You need to do more of that. You're basically moving into the PowerApps side of things. Attachments, people, you know, when you're filling it out, do you want to be able to add people to be able to add their resume or add their attachment, whatever it is, a photo. So that was definitely one that's missing. Page breaks or section breaks to be able to kind of lay the things out, make it easier to consume. They don't have those yet. And I say yet. Today, when I say this, who knows? In a week or two, they may change these things. So that's the kind of the nature of Microsoft these days. Is just because I'm saying it today doesn't necessarily mean it won't change tomorrow. Which is why, again, I'm saying go vote them up if you care about these things. There at the bottom, the form validation, that's huge. Email address. Wouldn't it be great to say that it has to be an email? Wouldn't it be great to be able to pick some field validation things? Definitely something we used to have in InfoPath was validation, form validation. The form validation is the only one you get is numbers, which is a little bit sad. You know, obviously there's pickers and choice, but that's not really validation. Pre-production, wouldn't it be great if you could have, here's the form we're going to be releasing. Let me go send this out before I release it. There is no kind of pre-published state. There's no kind of user acceptance. Once it's done, it's done. So, like as an example, if you wanted to create a form and then share it with, and kind of keep it locked down for some period of time, it's either released or it's not released. There's not a pre-prod state or a user acceptance kind of state. And I think that there's some things that they could do there. What about questions on, adding comments on a question? Basically, you've got to create another question to be able to add to get feedback on a question. So again, I think this would go along really well with you're building something in the enterprise and you're building something in a line of business. You want to know if a question's actually valid or not. You want the business group to be able to give their feedback. There's no easy way of getting feedback from users or getting even further detail on questions without adding another question, obviously. And then even things like multiple box type questions where it's like, give me your name, address, state, country. There's none of those pickers. There's no multi-box type questions. Each one of those is a new question. So when you're building out your list and you're trying to fill in your Excel, every single one of those is going to be a cell. So that could be kind of confusing there, especially if you're trying to do first line of an address versus the second line. Each one of those is going to be a different question, which could be confusing, I think, in terms, especially when you're trying to lay it out.
Say, Joel, are you saying a couple of questions? I'll just pop in. They don't do attachments right now, right? The Microsoft
Correct.
Forms. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So you're saying add that in. All right.
That's something we yeah, exactly. It's something that's not there by default.
They're asking if a form belongs to a company or person. I mean, what if a person leaves the company? Does that register any answer for you on that one?
You can get at those through an enterprise level, like your admins could get at a form. But the problem is it does seem like they could get lost, right? If somebody leaves, how are you going to know what forms they created?
Okay.
So yeah, that's some valid concerns for sure.
And there's no templates, right, for these that come with out of the box?
No.
Okay.
No, in PowerApps, they kind of have this idea of being able to create a template, but in Forms, there's not. Speaking of templates and what Microsoft's working on, Forms Pro was just announced. What is Forms Pro? Go check out formspro.microsoft.com. On there, you'll kind of see they've got this new embedding kind of capability. It's designed for apps and web and mobile. They've got new triggers that are built in there, so which obviously will make it being able to do more with flows. You can see in the embedding, you can do the inline or pop-up or button in terms of being able to embed surveys, which is kind of cool. You can see on the right the Forms Pro UI, where you can actually grab these embed links and so on. So being able to embed these, I can imagine how important this will be for being able to embed stuff right inside of Teams. But the reporting, I would say, is the biggest aspect of this. It's about analysis. You can get sentiment analysis. You can get analyzing feedback for new insights and impact. So that's like NPS type scores. That I can see that as being, you want to send a survey out and gather people's feedback. So that's a big one. PowerApps. So PowerApps, and there's a lot we can say about PowerApps. It's definitely the big brother to Forms, and really where Microsoft's been putting their muscles. So with PowerApps, basically, this is the rich UI. It's the responsive design. Basically, there's kind of three interfaces, and we'll go into this in just a minute. But basically, tons of connectors. It's all about prototyping and iterations. I could go on and on about PowerApps. In fact, there's people who spend days on workshops on this topic. But the idea is responsive. It's really about mobile. When they built this thing, it was all about mobile. And basically, your ability to connect and build these solutions around backend. The idea is being able to build apps in hours, not months. And it went from being kind of more of a client, use the UI to build the thing, and now it's actually a lot of working with APIs and JSON and so on. And I want to dig into that part just because I think there's a lot more to here. PowerApps, three major components for app development. Canvas apps, which it's basically all about UX and pixel perfect control. And that's, again, kind of being able to connect to 200 different sources, which is pretty powerful. The model-driven apps, where it's about laying out, building relationships, being able to pull in various different sources into these kind of model-driven apps. And then you got the CDS, the common data services, storing the store and model business data. And as well, like when you look at the Dynamics built apps, that's what they're actually built on. They're built on the common data service, which is built, it's leveraging Azure, the common data service with the data connectors and so on. And you can kind of as well kind of see the relationship there between the PowerApps, which is going to be your UI. It's your experience. Then you connect to the back end to get your data, like your entities that it might be in Dynamics 365 or in O365. But basically, if you're using Dynamics, you're definitely going to be more on that the common data services side of things. And so what's some examples? Here's a quick example of kind of what they look like here. So you can kind of see that PowerApps UI. This is a Canvas app that's being used across both the desktop in the back, the mobile on the left, and a tablet on the right, like an iPad. But a lot of people will oversell you on PowerApps as well. So it's really important to understand that PowerApps itself does have limits. So when we talk about the limits of PowerApps, a lot of people, they think, oh, I'm going from I've created all this stuff in InfoPath. Now I want to use, do I use Forms? Do I use PowerApps? Well, it's like, well, what do you got? If it was offline, you got to be really careful about offline. Canvas apps do have some offline capabilities, but it's not going to be that rich XML document that you had from InfoPath. You're not generating these files that can then be moved and edited and reshared and that kind of thing. It's basically being stored in SQL, or it's being stored in Azure. It's being stored in like in that common data service, or it's being stored in a SharePoint list. So it really depends on what you're doing there. There is no anonymous. Like I mentioned before, you need to have a license to be able to use PowerApps. Even just fill out the form, even just to use the app, you've got to have a license. And just like, even back in the day with InfoPath, people wanted to be able to print the stuff. It's like, if this is an entry form, they want picture perfect kind of look and feel. Well, you've got to either build that. There is no out-of-the-box export to PDF or that kind of thing. And don't let me skip over this limit row data. This used to be 500 when it first came out. They've upped it to 2,000. But basically, there's a limit on the non-delegatable queries. There are some workarounds. In fact, there's a bunch of different blogs and articles people have written on trying to get around this 2,000. So PowerApps is the new 2,000 item limit. So you got to, when working with large data sets, like somebody saying, oh, I've got 30,000 rows. Well, when you're working with that data, you've got to basically figure out, is it going to fetch those? How are you going to work with that data? If it's just inputting the data, that's not a problem. But if you're somebody on the back end who's working with that data and they're using PowerApps as the interface, that definitely needs some work.
Joe, one quick thing that go to webinar things blocking some of the writing in the bottom right. People are saying maybe we can move that off. You can move that off.
I will try and move that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, it's weird that it's showing. It shouldn't be showing.
Yeah, I know. That should be good like that for now. People can read it. Okay, good.
All right. And let me know if I need to move it again. Yeah, so basically, a lot of it has to do as well. If you've got hooked up to flows, you only get 750 flows per month. And as well, users can't create apps if they've got an F1. So licensing is a consideration here. If you've got an E3, it's fine in terms of filling things out. But there is some consideration. And what about the PowerApps Plan 1 and 2? There are premium connectors that you do need to consider for Plan 1 and Plan 2. I've got a little bit of data on that. As well as it relates to attachment and pictures, there's ways of pulling that data in, but often it's just read-only. So just be aware of that. And as well as it relates to managed metadata, being able to push managed metadata in, you're limited there. Basically, you can kind of display it as read-only, but you're not going to be able to add managed metadata. there may be some workarounds there again. Rating is another issue. No, there's no like rating type of inputs, columns, that kind of thing. So it really depends. Plan 1 and plan 2, and I just want to be kind of quick here. I know this is a very tight schedule here to be able to cover all this data, but you will have access to the deck. PowerApps is per user, okay? And just because of the license doesn't mean you can, PowerApps license do not limit the creation of apps, okay? The plan 1 basically gives you access to the common data service. And obviously that relates to Dynamics, because basically if you're a Dynamics user, you do have access to plan 1. With plan 2, and as well, if you have on-premise data you want to integrate with, you need to have at least plan 1. With PowerApps plan 2, this gives you the ability to run the model-driven apps, the code plugins, and the real-time workflows. As well as any of the kind of management, UI, and usage and policies, that requires plan 2. And I know that I'm just kind of introducing those things. We probably do need a follow-up webinar just on licensing, which sounds boring, but you could spend a lot of time digging through all this, for sure.
Sounds like Plan B from outer space or something. You know?
Yeah, definitely. So Flow, what about Flow? I do need to speed up here, but basically Flow is about adaptable business application platform for the common data service, Dynamics, O365. I really do think that simplified if this, then that. It's triggers, it's conditions, it's automating tasks and business processes. Again, I don't want to oversell it, but I do think that this is kind of the trying to connect one thing to another thing and then flowing the data, flowing the decisions. And what Microsoft's been investing in definitely lately is actually creating templates. And there's a ton of templates already in there, but this idea of in a SharePoint list, what are the things you should have it do? Oh, I want an approval. They're doing a lot in terms of investing in approval processes with Flow. Definitely don't want you to forget about Logic Apps. And what's interesting about Logic Apps is Logic Apps is the workflow engine for Flow. Now that's actually a really good, what do you call it? Really good quiz question. You know what I mean? Like if somebody who really knows their stuff, if you were to say, what's the workflow engine for Flow? They'd be like, well, Flow is the workflow. Actually, Logic Apps is the Flow. So it is the workflow engine. So that's really interesting. It enables these pro developers to visually create or programmatically configure workflows in Azure. B2B or B2C. In Logic Apps, we use enterprise connectors to create Logic App workflows between cloud and cloud services. And I didn't put anything about the gateways in here, but basically with a lot of these pro tools, you can, if you have the premium, you can actually purchase the gateway. The gateway is infrastructure to be able to integrate with the on-prem stuff here. The custom connectors. So we talk about there being hundreds of connectors. A connector is a proxy that has a wrapper around an API that allows it to talk to Flow, PowerApps, and Logic Apps. It provides a way for users to connect their account for pre-built actions and triggers, which kind of goes back to what is Flow. It's all about conditions and actions. And let me move on here. Flow does have plans. So basically, there's the 750 runs that you get, which can do up to 15-minute on the checks. So meaning it'll only check up to a maximum of 15 minutes. In order to have something check every 3 minutes, you need to be in Flow Plan 1. Got that? And so what you get with Flow Plan 1, which is $5 per user per month, is the 4,500 runs per month. Unlimited flow creation, 3-minute checks, and you get access to the premium connectors. Flow Plan 2 gives you 15,000 runs per month, unlimited flow creation, and a 1-minute check. So if you want something to be checking every minute to see if the condition has been met, you need to be using Flow Plan 2. Flow Plan 2, if you've got Dynamics 365, it includes Flow Plan 2. A little bit more here, and I don't mean to like kind of dive deep here, but there is information online. I've got a link there to the Microsoft pricing where you can actually compare the difference and see the differences in terms of what you get. Obviously, with free, there is no SLA, so that's probably an important consideration. If you're building business critical flows, you need to make sure that you're not just using the free one if you care about SLAs. And you can kind of see here, you want to be connecting to Salesforce and Oracle, you need to be using Plan 1 or Plan 2. That's definitely a consideration there too. All the governance and management stuff, what I found is you want to see usage, you want to see connections, you want to not lose them, as somebody mentioned. You want to have the governance around it, which is Plan 2. So that is definitely a consideration there. So especially if you're using Dynamics, that gets you there. So Power BI, the last one, and I do want to kind of speed this up a little bit, but the Power BI, business analytics, this is dashboards, this is reporting, this is bringing your data to life. I think Power BI has done a lot to simplify and help providing kind of the data analytics for the masses, for sure, and being able to access that. I think it has done a disservice in terms of how difficult sometimes it is to use, but there are some limits here. Power BI, 1 GB limit per data set. And then on the Excel side, limits 250 for the Excel experience. And then user and workspaces, all users have a maximum of 10 gigabytes of data storage. So that, and as well, the natural query language is only supported in English. So those are some pretty significant things. This probably as well needs its own infographic to just get this data out there so people know to complain about these limits. I think a lot of people don't know about it until they run into it. How do we build this mass? The Power BI desktop is the free. Anybody can go in and download that now. Power BI Pro, you want anybody to be able to consume your dashboards, to be able to view them, they need to have Pro. And then on the premium side, you basically can provide premium for your organization, and that's where that pricing is. It's a per node per month plan, and it's like, and there are some differences here, and I'm basically about out of time here, but basically the Power BI Pro license is required for distributing content to other users and for peer-to-peer sharing, and then as well publishing to the BI report server. The Power BI Premium is really for those large enterprises with thousands of users. So that's where that comes in. And there is a calculator out there. I have wrestled with that calculator, but that starts to reveal the behind the scenes. And if I had time, I would jump into that calculator, but I don't. And with that, I do want to hand things over to Scott and have him tell us a little bit about Nitro Studio.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Joel. I was trying to plow through the questions, a lot of questions about PowerApps and Flow. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of interest in this subject, and people are looking for tools, and everybody's kind of in the same boat of what do we do, how do we use it, what's the limitations, what do I get with my subscription, E3, E5. Also, the government cloud came up numerous times as far as, as you know, that's a different cloud than the commercial cloud. So there's other things going on. Are PowerApps and Flow available in the government cloud? Do you know anything about that, Joel? Or we can look it up.
Yes. So they're basically a staggered. So they don't have everything. It takes a little bit longer for things to get there and get certified. But that's the target is that these tools will be available for G-Cloud.
Okay.
I can't tell you exactly which ones are there. I'd have to go look myself.
Yeah, but they're moving in that direction to have them available for the government cloud.
Definitely. Yes. All of the things I've mentioned, Forms, Flow, and PowerApps, are things that are targeted, but not yet there. I think that, and I can't tell you what's there.
Okay.
If I
Well,
haven't.
someone asked about common data service. Is it like an OData connector to pull and post data with line of business systems?
It is. It is the idea of how you connect to data. Um,
Yeah,
these
but not line of
basically
business,
with the
really, is
wrappers and
it?
the connectors. So you're
Line of
basically
business.
building a connector which wraps around an API and makes it easier to build your forms and flows against it.
Okay. Okay. And Flow cannot be used by non-licensed
We can do some of
O365.
this Q&A after as well.
Yeah, let's do that. Right. Okay. I get embedded in the questions, and I want to get people's answers. But the thing is, we can do Q&A after. Let me
Yep.
give a brief view of what Crow Canyon offers with the Nitro Studio as a way of creating applications inside of SharePoint and Office 365. As I said earlier, we've been doing this for 20 years, have extensive application creation experience, and we've been in the SharePoint world ever since 2007 came out, so 12 or more years now. And from that, we built up we ran into limitations such as Joel mentioned in this webinar, as you know, in the earlier versions of SharePoint as well as the later versions in SharePoint Online. And as part of that, our response to it was to build up a platform of tools that are capable of providing the true capabilities that are necessary to build an application. Joel talked about PowerApps and forms. He talked about flow and workflows, talked about Power BI and reporting. And well, those all are parts of application, but there's much more to building an application and how they all parts work together to provide the functionality. So Nitro Studio focuses on forms, workflows, reporting, portals, the modern UI now in Office 365 and also SharePoint 2019. We're going into chatbots and AI services, database integration. So the point is, it's a comprehensive tool for application creation and building, and it runs in SharePoint Office. It runs in Office 365 and SharePoint 2013, 2016, 2019. You go to the next slide there, Joel. Keep it moving.
Yep.
Yeah. So we kind of have this principle from building applications that you have to gather information, you have to automate the process, you have to analyze it. So Nitro Studio is a multifaceted tool that encompasses all these realms. And we'll be having I'll mention this later, but we're doing a webinar in 2 weeks on the overview of Nitro Studio, and we'll go into more details, a lot of information on nitro.studio, kind of a cool URL there, nitro.studio that we have. Okay, and gather. Our principles are basically you have to engage and empower users. You have to have forms, portals, responsive design, modern UI, all these ways of gathering and accessing information from the users, whether it's customers or end users or employees or whatever. And you do it through forms, you do it through portals, you do it through email if they're sending an email, web forms, any way to gather the information. So you want to make it as automated as possible. And with the AI and the chatbots we're trying to engage the user and preempt perhaps some of the questions or give them instantaneous answers if we can answer the query based on what they're entering in the form or the box they're filling out on the web. Perhaps we can answer their question with a body of KB articles, or we use natural language processing and things like that to provide answers to them. Okay, then once it comes in, we have to automate it, which means we're looking to streamline and automate business processes. This means we're trying to save you money, time, make your organization more efficient, more profitable, or if you're a nonprofit or the government, make you able to provide better services to your citizens or your members or whatever. So that involves a number of workflows, actions, approvals, alerts, routing, all kinds of things that's longer than it's listed there, that over the years of the many different applications we developed, what is necessary to implement a process, a multi-dimensional process of whatever it is. It could be a simple workflow, it could be complex. Onboarding is an example of a complex that can be very complex. It could be also a simple request. Many variations on what's possible. And then at the end, and a lot of people don't realize how important this is the analytics to drive continuous cycle of improvement, so that when you're looking at your number of requests or your workflows, you want to look back and say, how can we make this process run better? So you have to have the reporting, the trend analysis, and things like that. Let's go to the next one, and we'll talk more specifically the kind of tools that we have here in the Nitro Studio. Nitro Studio consists of a number of tools, and we have the Forms Designer, WYSIWYG Forms Designer, we have a Workflow Manager, we have a Report Center, Custom Action Builder, a Print Template Manager. You can print out all kinds of invoices, purchase orders, contracts. We have a lot going on with email synchronization. In fact, we just added something kind of cool we're called email sentiment analysis. The person sends an email, and using natural language processing, we're able to detect if the person's angry or upset or something. based on the language in the email, and then send out an alert to a manager or customer service rep to take a higher priority on that incoming email. Just one example of the many things we're doing to make the business process and the applications more efficient and automated. We have knowledge base creators, application portal designer, bot builders, all kinds of stuff in our Nitro Studio, much more. You go to the next slide because we don't want to, I'm giving a really high level overview of Nitro Studio. And we can go in depth in contact us directly with a demo, a trial, or we can go over to, there's a webinar in 2 weeks, and we also have past webinars. You can look at all that. All right, one big number of projects we're working on is replacing InfoPath Forms with Nitro Studio. There's a whole section on it. We've written a guide to moving off of InfoPath. Big heavy into this. We have several projects going on right now, and we're looking to make it as efficient and streamlined as possible to get you, if you're using InfoPath, sometimes people have hundreds of them, moving from InfoPath over to a better solution, Nitro Forms or whatever works. Now, we go to the next slide also. There's a number of case studies we've done. There's a whole bunch up there, and we could talk about, this is just 3 small examples of the range. We're in healthcare, we're in education, we're in government, we're in military, we're in what else? Manufacturing, you name it, we're there all over the world. A lot of people moving away from legacy form solutions or workflows solutions. So it could be Access, it could be Notes, a lot of times it's InfoPath, or they don't have any process in place for that at all. And it could be easily streamlined and automated using simple forms and workflows that are available, Action Builder and that kind of thing with our Nitro Studio. So it's we're very excited, very interested in helping you out with this. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you that in addition to our Nitro Studio, of course, we have a whole bunch of pre-built, ready-to-go applications. Some people don't want to bother with building the whole thing from scratch using Nitro Studio and all that. They just want a help desk to put in place already, or an asset management or customer service or work order and onboarding, security access, all kinds of core business processes that are necessary to keep the organization functioning well and properly and efficiently. And a lot can be done inside of the SharePoint and Office 365 world, and it's getting more and more capable. Now, we talked about Flow earlier, and my whole concept here is that, BFF, best friends forever. Us and Flow are, our Nitro Studio and Flow work well together. We can use Power BI with our stuff. The only thing that probably conflicts a little is PowerApps, in the sense that you can only have one form, you can have multiple forms, but multiple Nitro forms. It's hard to have Nitro forms and PowerApps on the same application. But that's okay, because anything else, we put the Nitro forms, use some Nitro workflows, maybe some Flow connectors to connect to outside database, whatever works to build a application. So we have the Nitro Studio ready to go as kind of a platform to build your own or replace legacy solutions. And we also have the business applications, which are full-fledged, in use, many locations around the world, as a help desk or as a work order system or facilities management or onboarding or contract renewal management or purchasing has been really big lately. So we get a lot on purchase requests and generating purchase orders. So that's it. That's one other, 2 aspects to our company: the Nitro Studio, platform, and then the business applications that are built on top of it, on top of the Nitro Studio. You can go either way with us or both. Some people go both. They get the Nitro Studio and several applications. So they have ability to build applications on their own, or workflows or simple systems, as well as have our applications ready in place. So the next is, and again, this is a brief overview. We don't, we're getting up on the 1 hour mark here. We are very glad to answer any questions through email. Joel and I will stay on a little bit to answer questions that are popping in on the question screen over there. We can go on to the next slide, Joel, and look at that. Right, this is, first of all, Joel's stuff. I definitely encourage you to connect with Joel on LinkedIn or SlideShare. That's where we're going to see the slides. Collabshow.com is a great blog. It really, and of course, the first at the top is Twitter. Very good way to stay connected. Joel, like us at Crow Canyon, go to many of these conferences. Joel, you'll be at the Vegas one for sure.
I'll be speaking at the SharePoint conference even. Yeah,
Las Vegas, May 21st through 23rd. Big show there. If you can make it, it'd be great. There's also a lot of SharePoint Saturdays, help support the SharePoint community, Office 365 community around. There's one in Houston on April 6th I'm going to. There's a few others, and
let me pitch. My last name, Oleson, is a discount code for going to the SharePoint conference. So if you're planning on going, definitely use the discount. My last name, Oleson.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Definitely. And we'll be sending out a code too. We're silver sponsors of it. We'll have a big booth there.
Oh, great.
A lot of fun. And there's the SharePoint Fest that happened in DC in May, Seattle in August, and Chicago in what is it, December. So a lot of shows. I mean, it's
Lots of shows all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe, what have you been to? You've been almost every country, right?
I've only got 30 left. Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Anyways, we have travel.
Oh yeah, there's a Facebook. We have an upcoming webinar on 2 weeks. I'll be doing a webinar specifically on Nitro Studio and be able to dig into the forms, workflows, and all the other tools. And hopefully you'll take the opportunity to join that. You go to www.crowcanyon.com/webinars, and you'll see a sign up there, registration. We have another website that's, of course, it's our website, but we thought the URL was pretty cool, nitro.studio. And it has a lot of information specifically on Nitro.studio, on the Nitro Studio platform there. And you can sign up for a trial in that. And we'll get going. Or just email us at sales@crowcanyon.com. And, this is stuff we do all day, like Joel and, a lot of SharePoint people. This we live and breathe this stuff and try and stay on top of it. The ever rapidly changing Microsoft engine there, right? Isn't that change, Joel? That's changed like every day. There's something new. It seems, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of horses in this race. That's right.
That's right. That's right. Why don't we see if we can power through some of the questions? I mean, people want to stay for that. They can. We'll write a blog or we'll answer questions after. We'll maybe, like Joel said, we'll have to put together another webinar.
Go ahead and take a couple of questions now.
Yeah. Let me see what we have here. Would Power BI reporting server with Gateway bypass some of those limits that you talked about? You're showing your screen here.
Yeah, I was just trying to look at the panel.
All right.
So you go ahead and read it to me one more time.
Power BI report server with Gateway bypass some of those limits that you mentioned. I guess
basically, the gateway is all about accessing the on-prem, and the report server is about it. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what the limits are on the report server, but essentially, if you're using the online Power BI, that is related to how much data it can analyze. I'm not sure if that goes down or if it goes up related to being able to use report server. Great question. I will follow up on the blog on that one.
Somebody says Power BI report server will not be bypassed. Can Flow be used by non-licensed Office 365 users? Flow be used by I don't see how it would be, right?
No, to create a Flow, you've got to have the Flow license.
Yeah.
Forms is the only one that you really don't have to be licensed to be able to use. But like if you uploaded a file to a place where a form executed, you don't need a license for that. But if you're creating a form, one of the ways of kind of controlling forms is through licenses. Same deal with Power BI and PowerApps. Basically, when you control the license, you decide who gets to use it, essentially.
Yeah, there were some questions on what's available in the different subscriptions, and that really takes drilling into the subscription like E3, E5, or the G1s or whatever. Correct, to find out what's available and what isn't. And
let me just kind of take it at a high level. Most people do have the E3, and E3 does include all of those things. Basically, it doesn't give you the premium, but it gives you Forms, Flow, PowerApps, Power BI, but doesn't give you the ability to consume or to create reports or consume reports on the Power BI. Basically, it allows you to you can download the tool and run them locally, but as soon as you want people to actually consume the dashboard, that requires Power BI license.
Yeah.
And I know that's super confusing, and I think it is confusing. But basically, the free part of Power BI is the ability to do it locally.
We'll have to talk with someone here saying the E3 doesn't include Power BI, but I know we have E3 and it does. It does, right?
Well, E3 is your ability to do it. And basically, when you go to share that, you can share it, but if you're following the licensing, you should have a pro license to consume Power BI.
Right. Okay. Let's see. What do we say here? Other questions. Some people were saying that was too short a thing on Nitro. They want to see more. Well, that's why we're having the second webinar in 2 weeks. I know it was only meant to be a short. It was meant to be short, Okay, here's somebody asking, what do you think of SharePoint Framework, SPFX, as a tool to overcome the limits of PowerApps? That's an interesting question.
That's a great question, and I do think that SharePoint Framework is something we probably could have spent more time on in this deck about, because basically the SharePoint Framework is creating that UI in the part. And now what's great is Teams is now supporting SharePoint frameworks, not even just SharePoint, but even Teams. Your ability to create widgets, and that widget could be something that is kind of like a form. But obviously that's much more on the pure development side, where you're actually building it, but you also can control the look of it. And SharePoint Framework is all about creating modern UI that is responsive, easy to consume. And I would say the patterns and practices guys have done a good job of making it easier to build. But definitely it is yet another alternative for building applications inside of Office 365.
Yes, we've done a number of SPFX web parts in the modern UI, and if Zolio, I think, if I got that name right, if you're interested, then just contact us, and we can show you what we've done and how that might apply to what you're doing there. Here's like the $64,000 question. How do I port existing InfoPath forms to the new form solution? And there's several people working on solutions. In fact, we have, it isn't like you just push a button and you get from InfoPath to the new whatever.
Correct.
There's so much complexity in InfoPath forms, XML, XSN, that it isn't just an easy thing. Now, we are working on that. It's a little bit skunk works, but we have a partner who can extract the InfoPath data, and we're working on a way to interpret that data in order to build the Nitro forms and workflows out of it. It's no easy path to row to hoe there. It's Microsoft did not make it like import export in any sense of the word, right, Joel? When you say
correct. Essentially, I'm unaware of any kind of wizard. What we've used up to this point is a lot of us have kind of been under this assumption. It's like, well, if you can just get the data in there, then eventually some of these things go away, especially the surveys and quizzes and polls, which is primarily the forms side of things. So basically, you kind of draw a line in the sand and say, anything that new, let's build with the new tools. And then it's the same kind of deal of, well, then is it eventually going to die? Well, it's like, well, if you do lifecycle management, you can at least figure out what are the things that are worth keeping. And once you've got that list of things where there are working workflows and there are decent forms, and the company is seeing these as business critical, those are actually worth spending time on to convert. And you probably are using something more than just forms for that.
Yeah, that was our strategy, was to catalog the InfoPath forms, which is easy to do in a sense with some tools out there. You can catalog what you have, and then analyze whether you need to bring those over. And if you look at usage statistics, you can say, well, that form was created 3 years ago and 2 people used it or no one used it. So why are we bringing it over, right? So you can cull the herd a little there, and then move only what's really needed. And at the same time, you do a part of the analysis is interpreting how is this form being used, or how could it be better done in this new format of whether it's modern UI or a portal or the Nitro forms or whatever tool you're using, PowerApps if you want to do that. What new connectivity? We worked with a university that has a large student database, and they were doing InfoPath forms, and they weren't connecting the student complaint form, it happened to be, to the student database because it was too difficult for some reason with InfoPath. But when we went to the new solution, we connected the Nitro form to the student database so that it improved the capability. The student puts in his or her ID or email address or some unique identifier, and it's able to pull information from the database rather than have the person fill out it from every detail from scratch, right? So it's you can look at improvements that can be done as part of the process of moving from InfoPath to a newer solution. It's not just garbage in the old, put in garbage in the new. You want to analyze and make some critical decisions as to what's there.
Definitely a lot of archiving and lifecycle management of those forms and the data.
Yeah, it gives you a chance to refresh your forms.
A lot of it is you gotta draw that line first and say, all right, let's not create anything new in InfoPath and SharePoint Designer.
Right.
Gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, well, some people are asking more about the common data service, so maybe we can provide some links to what that is to those people asking those questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and well, the people are going to Vegas. Okay, they're letting me know.
Great to see you in Vegas. You know, I am actually organizing a little flash mob in Vegas. Check out the silly walks. I've got the miniature silly walks, kind of Monty Python little flash mob I'm going to be doing. That should be fun. So check out. That's on my blog, collabshow.com.
Okay. Now, people are asking about the deck. That's at that slideshare.net/Joel.
That's correct. So basically, as soon as we finish up here, I will be clicking upload, add some metadata, and I'll tweet it. So if you follow me on Twitter, the link above, as well, it'll pop up on SlideShare, and I'll even post it to LinkedIn. So all three of those, you'll be able to see it.
Okay, great.
It'll be not hard to find if you follow me there.
Well, great. Well, this is great webinar. It covered many subjects. There's a lot of questions, and I'm sure this will be an ongoing conversation between what tools to use, how best. It'll be debated for quite some time, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. And I know we scratched the surface on this. I apologize. We didn't really get to address every single question here, and I think that it's going to kind of continue to be confusing, and just wait. With Forms Pro, what is that going to add into the mix of what's this?
Yeah.
More premium features. Microsoft's working on a lot more stuff. See you at the SharePoint conference where they're going to release and announce a bunch more things. I think again, we're kind of scratching the surface, but as you can see, Microsoft's investing a ton into this space, and it's going to continue to be an exciting space for those of us who work in this space. So.
Right, and we'll look to get what questions we can answer. Some are specifically on flow, some are specifically on what PowerApps. We'll do what we can. Oh, Forms is a big. We'll get what we can with the questions. But I think we can wrap it up, right, Joel? Anything else you want to say before we?
That's right. Thanks a lot, Scott. I really appreciate it. And we'll see everybody soon.
Yeah, thank you all for attending, taking your time, and your interest in this subject. And we'll, like Joel said, we'll be in touch and talk to you soon. Thank you.